I was reading John chapter 18 a while back. I'm studying it for Bible class this Sunday, and I came across something, just a thought that popped in my head that made me think of something I hadn't considered before with regards to the trial and the abuse that Jesus suffers just before his crucifixion. If you remember back during the Sermon on the Mount, so now it's a few years before this, Jesus makes a very powerful statement that's become very famous where he says, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to them the other cheek. If someone takes away your coat, give them your cloak also. He says if someone compels you by law to carry their bags a mile, you should go with them a second mile. And it's with that last one where we have the phrase that we use all the time in the world today, which is go the extra mile. The Romans would sometimes compel their Jewish subjects to carry their bags for them, and by legal obligation they would for 1 mile, and that was all that the law required, and they would carry no more, not one step over 1 mile. But Jesus says, go the extra mile, carry them a second mile. In other words, go above and beyond in your call to service to other people. Well, it's one of those things where it's tempting for us almost to want to say, easy for you to say, it's easy to preach it. It's not so easy to practice it. And I know we use the expression, practice what you preach, but that's sometimes easier said than done. And so it might be tempting to look at my master and say, oh, well, it's easy for you to say. And yet my master lived that very thing. He practiced what he preached on the Sermon on the Mount. In John 18, as he was going through the ordeal with the trial to the various high priests that he would go to and to the Roman delegates he would go to, a lot of horrible things happened to him. On one occasion, he was struck right across the face by a temple officer after he sort of sassed the high priest. And they struck him on the face. But Jesus did not retaliate, as he preached in the Sermon on the Mount. Later, the Roman officials stripped him naked and put on him a scarlet robe to mock his royalty as the Son of God. But Jesus did not fight back, and he did not grow bitter in the shame of being stripped and mocked that way. He practiced what he preached. And then those very same Jews who should have been his neighbors and the Romans who were his enemies, both of whom Jesus says we should love in the Sermon on the Mount. Love your neighbors and love your enemies. Those two people conspired against him, his neighbors and his enemies, and they put him on the cross, and they compelled him to carry his own cross up the hill, and yet my master did it. He went the proverbial second mile by going up the hill and dying for the very ones who caused his death. He put himself on the cross and allowed himself to die for the very ones who conspired against him. So, you can say practice what you preach, but my master practiced what he preached, and he calls on us to follow his example. I hope that we'll all think about that as we go through our lives, and we'll try to live a life that's similar to Christ lived. We won't be perfect, but we can try to practice what he preached.